Lady above that I'm never letting get near you, but still in all, give you every advantage I found. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down, cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
My sons will never play with dogs. In fact, I refuse to let my sons play with dogs. That's not what men do. Men are supposed to be leaders, protectors, providers. How do I expect him to be the head of a home when he's steady tending to a house made of plastic? I refuse to let my sons play with dogs. If I ever catch him with a Barbie, a Bratz, a Polly Pocket, or Cabbage Patch, I swear my right hand to God, I will set him straight, knowing that is not how God intended for us to act. I said I refuse to let my sons play with dogs. Because I don't want them learning what it's like to have ownership over a woman's body. Thinking that all women are born with strings on their back. That if you pull hard enough, they'll act how you want them to act, wear what you want them to wear, talk the talk, and walk the walk straight into a box that was never designed to hold the sound of a woman's voice, let alone her stretch marks. Tattooed across her skin as a result of reaching so far across the universe, she bridged heaven and earth, yet still there are men who view women as more mistake than they do miracle, who spit sexist slurs through their teeth like refund receipts for all the clothes he will never allow her to wear, because she's showing too much skin, because that outfit is asking for it, because all she wants is attention. Men who are more likely to punish you for an abortion than they are for sexual assault. But if they see the procedure to be the murder of a baby inside of a woman, then tell me, when a girl gets raped, is the child inside her not dying too? Is the robbery of her innocence not worth better laws, or will we continue to force these girls into a motherhood they never asked for? A friend tells me that her mother was born from a rape. And I ask how she's coping with that today, if she now has to look her mother in the eyes and wonder if she's able to see the blessing before she sees the trauma, or does she sit silent in sorrow whenever that train of thought crosses those battered borders in her brain? My mother tells me that she was 25 when she got her first doll, but that her first memory as a child was being beat by her father. And it hurts to know that, like so many other girls, my mother had to live her childhood backwards, being treated like a woman well before she was one, yet never taken seriously long after she became one, having to train her words daily until they were callous, just so maybe what she says might be able to hold a little bit of weight. I hate that I have to use my platform to beat problems of political policies that are not mine to paint. So don't mistake this for spray can saviorism spread across the canvas of shit that's trending. Think of it more as my apology for every time I turned a blind eye on a woman just trying to be seen. And a promise to the men who laid hands on my mother, and her mother, and her mother: if I ever see you again, I will send you straight back to whoever it is you pray to at night. For if God were to set foot on this great earth, let it be a stiletto, or a pump, a wedge, a knee high, a thigh high, or whatever the fuck she wants to wear, because she's not a toy, she's a woman. My boys will not make toys out of women, so I refuse to let my sons play with dolls until they actually understand the difference between the two.
Welcome to another episode of That Is Not a Noun. My name is Ishmael, changing the narrative for men of color fatherhood, as well as changing the narrative on the things I care about. And I have a special guest with me. What you just saw was a powerful piece called Barbie. And I have the talented poet, Demetri, with me. Thank you for coming on, brother. How you doing?
Thank you for having me, man. It's pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much. I'm doing good. I'm blessed.
I'm blessed to have you on. I've been watching your YouTube channel. I'm a big fan of your poetry. I'm a poet myself.
Nice.
But the first question I always ask my guests, because I'm all about mental health: how's your heart?
At this moment, it's good. That's something that changes quite a bit, especially with daily struggles. But at this moment, I'm good. I'm at peace. It's Sunday. I'm not working, so I'm usually just taking this time to reset. So we're good.
And that's good. That's good. And I think the most powerful thing of a poet is that power of being vulnerable.
Hmm.
to be on stage, to share your story, just like the piece Barbie. And I felt like Barbie was a love letter to your mom to let her know I understand, I resonate with you. I know I'm a man. I know things that I don't understand, but you know what? I'm here for you, and I know your story. So give me a good behind the story of Barbie.
So Barbie really, as many of my poems are, really was born out of just a simple conversation. This one was three separate conversations that I could really pinpoint. One of them being with my mother, another with a friend, and another with my girlfriend. All kind of relating to the same topic of just internalized misogyny. Outside of my father, who passed a couple years ago, I really was, all my role models were women. So I was raised kind of in that environment. And so me growing up, I'm thinking like, yeah, like I was raised by women. I'm very comfortable talking with women. Like, yeah, I'm cool. I'm dope. Like I don't do anything wrong. Um, and these conversations help open my eyes to some of the subconscious things that we all do that kind of support misogyny. And it was a really difficult pill for me to swallow, just because our natural instinct is to get defensive, like nah, like I'm not misogynistic, like whatever, like. And something that my girlfriend had to say to me to really put it in perspective. She's like, men aren't the only ones that do this. Women do this as well. It's just, how our society kind of runs right now. And the biggest thing she brought to my eyes that made me kind of finally understand was she's like, think about all your favorite artists, your favorite comedians, your favorite podcasters. She was like, chances are most of them are going to be men. And she was like, that's not, it might not be consciously like intentional, but um, our job is to kind of figure out how much of that is subconscious misogyny and how much of it is something else. So that's what really sparked the idea for Barbie, was to kind of address those I guess internal conflicts that I was having with myself, and that I know that a lot of people are also having. But the poem kind of works as it kind of plays both sides of the field, and what I mean by that is, on one hand, um, it does act as almost a form of an apology uh, for women all over, every time that I may have kind of displayed some of this internalized misogyny, and for I guess not seeing that until now. And but that actually wasn't the original intent of the poem. Like yes, women empathize and they relate to the poem, and I'm grateful for that. But the original intent of the poem was the original audience, I guess, was the people that agreed with the first lines in the beginning.
Mm.
Because I performed this poem all over, and depending on where I'm at, those first lines will either be super tense and like people will be really quiet, or the crowd will just go crazy, like cheering, like agreeing with it, right? And that was the intent of the poem, was to address the people that agreed with those first lines, to bring them in and then sort of shine a spotlight and be like, hey, this is what I'm actually talking about. This is what we need to address. Because if I just started it off as just like a women empowerment poem, I'm preaching to the choir at that point. I they agree with what I'm saying, but the whole idea behind this poem was to talk to a group of people that didn't agree with what I was saying, but to find a way to get them to listen. And that's the trick with social media. You swipe and you see the first line, I refuse to let my sons play with dolls. People are either gonna agree with it or heavily disagree with it. And
Right.
that's why I feel like this poem specifically did so well on social media, is because it caught certain groups of people off guard, in the way that I intended it to. But I'm glad and I'm super grateful that it did play the other side as well, as allowing women to be seen and kind of breaking that fourth wall almost, where it's like, they're kind of living in this whole other world that a lot of men don't realize exists. And this is kind of me like peeking around the curtain, be like, hey, like I see you, like don't worry, I see you, like we're gonna get there, But yeah, that was kind of the overarching story behind Barbie.
Definitely. And I think what made that piece so powerful is that you don't judge and you test our hypocrisy because at the end of the day, we're all hypocrites.
Yes.
And so that first line, like you were saying, that you're trying to test the water to see, all right, who's going to agree with me?
Yeah.
Who's willing to go down that rabbit hole with me? You
Yeah.
know, And then when you start getting deeper and deeper, you're like, damn, like, you know what? I do think that way.
Yeah,
The
and
maid, God,
it's like I said, it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. A lot of the initial response from the poem before it blew up, there was a lot of hate and a lot of just um, I guess it's the best word to describe it is hate. Like in my messages and comments saying like, "Oh, you're a misogynist. Like I can't believe you would say this." And it was clear. I'm like, you did not watch past the first 40 seconds. Um, and I don't typically respond to those because I'm just like, listen, if if you're gonna judge something as quick as that, like I'm not gonna be the one to force you to watch it.
yeah,
It's like, I want you to be able to say to yourself, hey, let me not judge what this dude is saying and just listen. And that's why I commend all those people that didn't agree with those first lines for watching it all the way through because I know how those first 40 seconds sound and I know how uncomfortable it must have been to have to sit through that. But that's why I commend every single person that did watch it because that is not an easy task to do to not judge, especially now in 2024.
definitely. But just talk about that vibe of the room when you heard that one lady in the audience say thank you.
So that the recording of Barbie, I think was that crowd maybe 7 people, 8 people, um, and I forget her name. Uh, there was two ladies that spoke in that video. One of them, the Las Vegas local, her name is MVP Speaks. Um, Amazing poet, amazing soul, and she's always been so supportive. The other lady, I forget her name, but I know she's from Salt Lake, a poet as well, and a insane poet, like very talented. I'm gonna have to find her name and send it to you. But um, to that was kind of like hearing that was permission for me to like, okay, like you're good, go for it, um, because there's been times when the first time I performed that poem, right, was at an open mic, and there's these 3 girls sitting in the front row. First time they ever attended an open mic, and they walked out in the first 15 seconds of the poem, like they did not stay to see the rest of it, and um, so it meant a lot that not only did they sit and listen to it, but that they encouraged me afterwards, like, hey, like you got it on, like you're hitting it on the head, you keep going. But that room was mainly poets, so I think that was what worked to my benefit was that in the poetry community, it's very much like you speak your truth. Like I'm not going to judge you. If that's how you genuinely feel, like it's art at the end of the day. Um, and so yeah, that's really what set the mood for that room because yeah, it was only 8 people, but the energy was insane. I mean, Mello Jones, who incredible poet, he was in the audience at that time. And a bunch of other great Las Vegas poets. And if you know anything about poets, which I know you do, like their energy is insane, especially when someone's spitting, like
Oh yeah,
they get crazy. But yeah, that was hearing that thank you and that like that sheesh in the background was just like um it was that little bit of like permission that I needed to like really go in on this poem where it's like, okay, they're getting it. Let me really like go all out now.
and to just talk about in that piece, like there's a portion of that piece you're challenged, you're challenge, you're not channeling, channeling your inner your mom.
Hmm.
Like, take me in that part of that piece. Like, I felt like you took an out of body experience and you were your mother in that piece.
Yeah.
So just
So
talk about that, man.
first and foremost, my mother is one of the strongest people I know, if not the strongest person I know. And I say person, not not woman. I say person because it's truly how I feel, mentally, physically, emotionally. And we have I don't live with my mother anymore. I moved out, but we have Sunday dinners every week. So I'll be actually headed over there in a second. But every week, those conversations will kind of come up. It'll be my brothers and I with my mom, and we're all just talking around the table, and she's telling us stories, or we're telling stories, just talking. And it hurts to know that her strength was born out of just a really rough past. And that's what I try to express a lot in my poems, was that my mother is an incredibly strong woman, and she is the way she is because of what she had to go through. Whereas my brothers and I display a different kind of strength because of watching our mother, where it's like we gained the strength because she showed us how to be strong, whereas she gained strength because her past forced her to be strong. Um, and that conversation was true. You know, my mother was telling me that she didn't get her first doll until she was 25. I believe it was a Cabbage Patch doll, but I believe it was one of her friends that got it for her because she had told her like she had never had a doll growing up, and that, you know, it was really emotional for her. And the same thing, she was saying that her very first memory of her father was being beat by her father, and that's the type of childhood that she was raised in. Um, and it hurts because you can't you can't change the past. And it's like, as much as I want to go back and, you know, fix those things for my mother, like it's all said and done. Like there's nothing that I can do about it other than speak on it, and ensure that the way that I raise my children and the way that, you know, I progress through life, goes against what she had to experience. But yeah, that anytime I say this all the time, anytime I mention my mom or like my brothers in a poem, that's the hardest part for me, especially on stage, because like people don't understand when you're on stage, like you're metaphorically standing there naked, man. Like you're telling all your deepest, darkest secrets. And any time that my family gets brought into it, that's like the hardest for me emotionally, because it's raw and it's real. And so yeah, it was almost like an out of body experience in a sense, where it was like, in order to really get that point across, I had to put myself in my mom's shoes and really understand like what it is that she's going through and what it is that I was trying to get across the audience, and kind of bridge those two narratives. Um, but yeah, my mother's someone that I write about a lot, especially because after my dad passed, he was the only person I ever wrote about. Um, Probably for like the year after he passed, like it was just him. Like it didn't matter what emotion I was feeling, he was involved in it some way. Still is in a sense, but poetry and the community really opened my eyes to different perspectives. And I talk about this when I would do like 30-minute or hour sets, where it's like poetry will show you a perspective that you would have never thought before. So I always say, yes, as heartbreaking as it is that I lost my father, you know, it opened my eyes to see how much my mother does for us, even after his passing. You know, that I still have her and that I still have my brothers, you know. And it's important to cherish what we still have here and not get so hung up on what we don't have. But it's a difficult process every day, but it's a perspective that I am grateful for, because it did lead to pieces like Best Chef I Know and Barbie and all those pieces. So
Definitely. And I definitely feel your connection to your father before you passed, because of the piece that you wrote called, was it The Mailbox to the Bridge? And
yeah,
how you guys used to
yeah,
race to see if you could beat your dad
yeah,
to get to home. But just talk about that connection between your dad from that piece.
man. So my dad, everyone's gonna say this about their dad, right? Because it's our own bias. So my dad was that dude, man. He just to give like just to preface, like the best way I can talk about him or explain who he was, would just be like tell stories about him. And the biggest story that I can think of is he would pack our lunches for us from kindergarten all the way through college. Like and every lunch he would get up every morning. You know, he worked nights, and he would get up every morning 4 a.m. Pack all my brother's lunches, my mom's lunch, and he would handwrite notes every single day in
Wow.
our lunches. And by the time I made it to high school, he would notice that I was coming home like a little hungry every day, and he's like, "What's been happening to your lunch?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm sharing it with like a couple friends at school. Like, you know, they don't come to school at lunch." Next day, he packs two lunches for me. He's like, "Give this one to your friend."
Wow.
And then next day, he packs two more lunches on top of that, because he finds out about other friends that don't have lunch, um, and writes them all notes and stuff too. And he was one of those people that if I was friends with someone, like they are now family, where it's
Mm.
like he's gonna treat him like that. Um, and when it's unfortunate because his funeral was at the peak of COVID, so there was like a capacity inside the venue where his funeral was at. but it was live streamed, and thousands of people live streaming his funeral. And I still get messages to this day about like people saying like, your father was one of the greatest men I knew. And in my head, I'm like, I don't know who you are, but thank you. It's like I was downtown the other day, and there was a cop doing a traffic control, and he sees me on the street, and he's like, was your dad Nell?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's my dad." And he just gave me the biggest hug ever, and was like, "Yo, your dad like changed my life."
Wow.
And he was just a walk in the light, man. And so that is a blessing and a curse, because for me, it's like, damn, like how am I gonna like? I was struck, that's the example I have. That's the
Yeah.
standard that's been set. But I'm very grateful for that, because it did teach. He did leave very soon. I was 19 when he passed, but I feel like I was given more than enough based on everything that he's taught my brothers and I to be able to go on and live the rest of my life. And it wasn't like it wasn't clearly outlined lessons. It was just watching the way he treated people, and because that's the first thing that everyone says about him is your father was the nicest person that anyone's ever met. He was so kind, so generous, very thoughtful. Something specific that I'm learning to do is we'd always make fun of him because he was always on his phone, always texting people on the phone with someone. Always, I'm like, you don't know this many people. And he was very active on Facebook, and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, my friend," and we're like, "Okay, Facebook friend or like friend?" And but he cared about everyone with the same. He loved everyone with the same level of intensity. He would keep dates like on his calendar, like like if his friend's dad had passed away, he would keep that date in his phone. He would keep his friend's dad's birthday in his phone, and anytime one of those dates would check up, that's why he was always on the phone or texting people. He was always reaching out to those people, saying like, "Hey, like just sending you love. I know this is a really hard day," and that's what people remember the most about him, is that the fact that he remembered all the tiny details about people. I mean, like he still reached out to people that he went to kindergarten with.
Wow.
He was very intentional when it came to the way he treated people and making people feel loved. Like that was, I feel like his biggest goal was to make sure that everyone he interacted with felt loved. And so that's the connection that I was blessed enough to have with him, and that's the example that I was blessed enough to have set for me. To where it's like now, I try to emulate all these things because I know I've seen the type of impact they can have on people.
Definitely. And I think that's his legacy to you, and the rest of his children, is that to tell his story. Just like your mother, to tell their story. They probably don't have the skills on the mic to tell the story like you do, but it's important that you tell their story. But talk about when your mom heard you the first time recite that piece. Talk,
So
talk about that.
yeah, so it's funny. The first year almost a year. The first year-ish I was doing poetry, my mother had no idea. I come from a very traditional, like you need to go to college, go to med school, do all this stuff.
Mhm.
And so when I was actually taking poetry seriously, I didn't say anything about it to anyone, because I was like, let me just feel this out. And then eventually I was getting a little bigger. And then one of her friends at work sent her a flyer where I was headlining. And she was like, so were you just never going to tell me about this? And I was like, oof, I knew you were going to find out sooner or later, but I was hoping it would be later
Right.
when I had, a little more to show for it. But the first time she heard that piece, I was featuring at an event. I was doing like an hour set. And the first time she heard it was the first time I ever performed it live.
Wow.
And she hates when I do that, because she doesn't like, she's one of those people that's real hard on the outside, doesn't like to show emotion in front of people.
Right.
And it was one of the only times I ever like emotionally, like almost like broke down on stage, where I had to like take a second, because like I was getting really overwhelmed, because
Right.
most of the times I practice enough to the point where I'm able to talk about these really difficult subjects without breaking down. And like I said, it was the first time I performed that piece live. And so it was the very last poem I did. I did this whole set,
Right.
and then I started talking about my mom. I'm telling jokes about how he grew up, and it leads into the poem. And it was so difficult, because usually I'm known in Vegas as a poet who makes the audience cry.
Right.
That's like, and everyone's like, if you're going to see them, you got to bring some tissues, bro. It's like you're gonna end up crying at some point in the set. Um, so usually, if people start crying, it's hard for me to watch that and be able to stay focused. So I'll try to look for someone that is like still staying composed, so I can focus on them because like I need to stay composed myself. But when the first time I performed that piece, every single person in the venue like ugly crying, like just hysterically, just like red cheeks, like running down, and um, that was the point where it was like I can remember the exact line where it was um, talking about how she breaks off tiny pieces of her soul, rolls it with the prayers,
Right.
and the part where I get because when my father died, and then at that point when I've seen everyone cry, and it just a real like out of body like flashback of everything my mother did after he died, and like it was really hard to to stay composed in that moment
Right.
because I feel like specifically in that moment, I was just realizing, like, through grief, she lost her husband, she lost her sister some years before that. She's lost so much, but even through all that, she still manages to wake up in the morning and make Christmas happen, make birthdays happen, and make all that happen. And in that moment, uh, that's what overwhelmed me the most because that's that simple line when my father died, because my father was known as Disneyland dad. Like he was
Right.
the person that didn't reprimand, like he was all fun and games. And his passing made me realize like all the foundation that my mother specifically created for our family.
Right.
So the first time I performed that, that was the line where I was like, I stepped back from the mic real quick, and I literally just had to like take like 30 seconds because I was like, I could not continue. I was gonna break down into a puddle full of tears like I am right now, man. It's just even now it's difficult to talk about, but that was the first time she heard it, and she was so pissed off at me for it because she was like, "You should have told me." She was like, "Now you got me crying in front of all these strangers." But no, after that whole set, I walked outside the venue because I needed to breathe, and she walked outside with me, and we just kind of like stood there and hugged, and we're just talking about it, just talking about my dad and just how the set was, and it was a really beautiful experience because it was it was my first set, but my mother was there as well, and just hearing that praise from her, and seeing the impact that had on everyone, it really meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Do you realize now in hindsight what you did was you unlocked her to be vulnerable, which was hard for her as a girl growing up, to be vulnerable because she trusted someone growing up and they just took her trust like it was a nothing, took advantage of her. And
Yeah,
so what you did was you were able to have her be that little girl again in that moment to again to be vulnerable, to
yeah,
trust. Because the only person she really trusted was was her husband. He
hmm
passed away, even though her kids, but that connection, that bond,
yeah.
that was with your dad.
And that was something that took me a while to realize because the way my father cried all the time, where it was like he would watch Lion King and would just be bawling his eyes out, right? And we used to joke about it because he would just get so emotional about the smallest things, and it made that type of behavior normal for us. It was like it's okay to be vulnerable and stuff. But now that you mention it, and even in recent weeks, I'm realizing after reading all these messages from people where it's like they've been hurt by someone that they trusted. They've been hurt by the people close to them, and it's forced them to put up a wall. And me, this is specifically now with Barbie, like me bringing up all these, uh, I guess, um, memories that relate to them. Kind of, it does unlock that wall and kind of opens them up a little bit to where it's like now they feel seen, almost like they feel like they can be vulnerable with that piece specifically. And it was something that I didn't realize until recently, to where it was like just because of the way I grew up, it was normal for us to be emotional. It was normal for us to be vulnerable, but I'm seeing that many people don't have that privilege, or weren't raised with that privilege of being able to be vulnerable around the people they trusted without having to worry about being hurt.
And it's so true. And like transition into the next piece. If you haven't watched your video Clouds, you have to watch Clouds because you have Barbie and then you watch your piece Cloud. It makes sense.
It
It makes
was
totally sense. So talk about Clouds.
so um and it's so funny, man, because I was done making those YouTube videos, just because my whole idea behind Clouds and every video that followed was like, bro, I'm gonna have this black chair, I'm gonna sit in the center of the screen, and eventually it's gonna be like dope in like landscapes and stuff. And I'm gonna sign this black chair one day, and I'm gonna perform on stage with it. And the black chair is everything. That black chair ended up getting stolen, man. But still, it was like that was the plan. And then I ended up taking a break from that because I was like, man, like I found spoken word and all that, and I was like, yeah, this is really what I'm gonna end up doing. And it wasn't until Barbie that once Barbie started getting more attention, people started funneling into my YouTube channel, and that I hadn't touched in I think almost a year at that point, because I had no plans of continuing. I was like, yeah, I'll just stick to TikTok, Instagram,
Yeah.
whatever. And then it led me to rewatching those videos, and then when I got to Clouds, I was like, man, this poem, the reason why I don't feel like I wanted to continue my YouTube channel was because I feel like this poem was written before it made sense, like you said, to where it was like everything leading up to now, which ironically, makes everything before it makes sense. Um, I forgot which video it was. I think it was Grandma's House.
Yes.
That one was filmed in the Philippines, inside my grandmother's old house. And the story I tell in that is true. Her house was the only house in the Philippines that survived. I believe it was Super Typhoon Yolanda. It was her house and the church that you can see in the video, which all of that was intentional. And at the time, and I also think it's because I've spent so much time in the poetry community. Now I can see that all of this stuff, it's leading to something so much bigger, like Clouds, especially Grandma's House, where it's like I was writing all these pieces for these future pieces,
Yes.
so that when people come back to that, they're like, this. It's like one, like almost like realization, like it makes sense now. But with Clouds specifically, that was a poem that I deeply resonated with in the beginning, and I still do, because it was in a point in my life where grief was. I was still trying to figure out grief. I grew up very familiar with grief. I think from the age 10 till now, like at least once a year, either a close family member or a close friend would pass, and as terrible as it is to like make light of it, but we would kind of, my brothers and I, we used humor to get through it. We're like joking, like, we might just be cursed, man. We can't go a year without something happening. And so it didn't really give me a chance to fully process the person that just passed, because then someone else would come along and pass. So it was just all just pending grief. And then when my dad passed, and to anyone that has lost a parent before, they like, your world just stops. And it's just nothing makes sense at that point. And to the point where my grandmother passed, his mother passed, I think 3 months later, to where when she passed, like I think I say in one of my poems, like I didn't even flinch. Like I was just so numb to the point, because it's like, how much worse can we get from here? So I don't say this out of me being heartless. I say this out of me being out of emotion. Was at my grandmother's funeral, I don't even think I even cried. Where it was like my world was stopped, like everything was frozen. And Clouds was that first piece that where I felt like I started to try and make sense of things. And I tried to finally start processing all this pending grief, dating all the way back to when I was 10 years old, and really just kind of comforting that younger Demetri that didn't get a chance to grieve all the way. And Clouds, that's why Clouds is so special to me, because that was my first attempt at taking on this journey that had been put off for far too long. But that's why that piece specifically does resonate with me.
And I think it resonates with me so much is that in the piece you talk about how this cloud is beautiful, but it's like this large pound heavy cloud that's in the
Yeah.
sky. You can rain or it just stay there, but yet, and how you just not transition, but how you put it together, the human emotion experience, compare it to a cloud, is truly genius, because as a poet, I've never heard that comparison before.
Thank you, man. It's it's one that it took me a while to put into words as much as poetry does. But that specific comparison was a result of the amount of people telling me like, oh, like you're handling your father's death so well. So where it's like, or you're handling these deaths so well. And on the outside, it did look like that. My father passed. Um, my entire family was at work the next week. That was because my mother's biggest thing was, um, she made it a point to tell us like this does not define you. Like you don't let his death like take you down a path of drugs or a path of alcohol or a path of any of these things. You use this and you be better. Like you use this as your motivation to go on and do great things. And so yeah, we went back to work. That I think my brother, he's a professional fighter. The next week or so, he had his first title fight, and he won the match. And it's like I was working on all this stuff with poetry, and um, from the outside, everyone will be like, the Manabats are so strong, they carry this weight so well. But it's like, again, at the end of the day, it's weight,
Right.
and it's grief is one of the heaviest things someone can carry. Um, and even though it seemed like it was being carried so well, it's you don't understand until you're actually in that scenario that it is extremely heavy. And that made me start thinking about clouds, man. It was like, damn, like I remember learning in science, like these things are like tons of pounds. Like how are they floated? Like they're just so floated so carelessly, so easy. Because when people think about like calm and peace, they think of clouds. When really, like, bro, these are tons of pounds, like tons of thousands of pounds. Like it's one of those things that you see as a poet. You're like, that's a poem right there. But it's like, you see all these different examples in the real world, and that was one of them that truly did resonate with me specifically at that time. Was just the comparison of the weight of clouds and the weight of grief, and just how it looked from the outside perspective.
And that's the beauty of a mind of a poet. You see things, the simplicity and the complexity of things before anybody else, and that's the beauty
Yeah.
of a poet. And what I love about the cloud, because it kind of draw the line between imposter syndrome a little bit
Yeah.
in that piece, and that's why I love the complexity of that piece.
Yeah. It was, and the great thing about poetry is like, depending on where you are in life, when you watch it, like it could mean something so different. Um, there's this I used to have this Instagram page like back in the beginning of high school, like just super anonymous, where I would just write just like short little poems. And I went back to it recently to just kind of read over some of them. And I knew what I was talking about at the time when I wrote those poems, but after experiencing everything I did with my father and my grandmother, um, I took on just such a different interpretation of the poems, to where it's like now, when I'm working on my first chapbook, like I might include some of those pieces, but put it in a different context,
Mm.
because that's how it's resonating with me today. It meant something completely different back then, but it doesn't invalidate it at all. It's just being picked up in a different light.
Definitely, definitely. And just talk about that moment when you found your voice, because every poet has that moment in time when they found their voice. When was that time for
um,
you?
Man, I feel like that's still an ongoing process for me, man. I There's a great poet and huge inspiration for me by the name of Obi West,
Okay.
and I was blessed enough to be able to speak with him. He lives out here in Vegas, and that was one of the things we talked about, because I suffer from severe impressionism, man. In the beginning of my poetry career, I would write poems that were based off of like other poems I saw. I'm trying to and like do my own rendition.
I I don't know if you muted yourself.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, got
Okay, cool. Sorry, let me put myself on do not disturb.
okay.
But yeah, I was just struggling because I felt like I was writing these great pieces. Like for example, I have a poem on my TikTok called "Broken Guitars," and that is a complete impressionist poem of Rudy Francisco's "Drowning Fish,"
Right.
where I thought it was a great piece, but then people were starting to pick up on that. We're like, "Oh, that's Rudy Francisco's piece," and it's like, damn, like it was hard for me because in my head I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing." Like I'm using my voice when in actuality I was just using other people's version of my voice.
Mm,
Um, and so I was able to speak with Obi about it, and I was like, man, like, do you have any like tips or like resources that can help me find my voice? And he should have just said no. And I was like, really? And he was like, listen, he was like, that would be doing you a disservice. He speaks very poetically. Like I don't know if you've ever seen him perform, but he speaks the exact same way he performs, which is I find incredible. But he um, he first off he said, why did you ask me for this advice? And I was like, because you have such a unique voice. Like it's no one is can emulate that style that you have. And then he goes on to say, well, why do you think that is? And like, what makes my voice unique? And I was like, well, essentially it's you. Cause like I said, you speak the same way that you perform. Um, and his whole thing was, if I were to give you all these resources that I had, and all these tips and tricks that I used, I'm afraid that you might just end up being an impression of me.
mm,
And he's like, the only person that can, and as frustrating as this was at the time, he said, the only person that can teach you to find your voice is yourself. Like that exists within you. Um, and specifically with poetry, he encouraged me to expand outside of poetry when it came to studying certain material, to where he was like, if you listen to poetry all day, you're always going to sound like a poet. He was like, if you're trying to pave your own lane and create your own voice, you need to dive into other fields, such as listening to comedy for their storytelling, listening to podcasts to figure out how they can keep an audience engaged, listening to TED Talks for how they're able to fit an abundance of information in that single talk, and make it make sense and make it effective. Um, and so it wasn't until that conversation with him, which was only I think like 2 3 months ago, that I had that switch to where I was like, okay, let me stop. Let me just take a step back from watching all these other people work and figure out what I want to sound like. And up until that point, I feel like the only poem that I felt was true to my voice was The Best Chef I Know, because
mm.
all of that was me. I didn't need another poem to inspire that. That was inspired by my own life. And that style was inspired by my own life. I'm sure it exists somewhere else in other poems, but the intent was never to emulate another piece. And then the same thing with Barbie. Like, yes, you see all these pieces that have those twists, that have those flips. Like, that's a common occurrence,
Right.
especially in slam poetry. But specifically that piece, like everything I said in that, and the way that I said it was genuine, and it was me, and that's why I felt like it was received in the way it was, because an audience can tell when you're not being genuine. An
Yes.
audience can tell when you're not being honest. And that was the trick for me that I'm now trying to actively, I guess, incorporate in my writing today, is just making sure that every line that I say is honest and every line that I say is genuine. And even if there's like a sliver of doubt, like, do I actually mean that? Let me change it to where I know for a fact, like, this is what I mean. This is my voice. This is what I'm trying to say. And so finding my voice is a very day to day battle, but slowly working at it, slowly working at it.
But you are, man. You definitely are. And for someone from the outside looking in, I think I watched a lot of your other pieces. I from a perspective, I think Barbie is your piece that where you found your voice, because you had that stage presence. Like, for someone who's never seen your poetry before, like me being the first, like seeing that video for the first time, I'm like, all right, he gets it, he's confident, he has the audience in the palm of his hand. It's like a roller coaster of different emotions.
Yeah.
And so I would say that video right there was your, I got this shit, this is
Thank
me.
you, man. Thank you. And it's funny because that's one of the poems where it's like, as soon as I started, like, I'm inside on the inside, I'm nervous, man. I'm shaking just because like I know what's about to come.
Right.
and I know that it is a heavy amount of emotion that's about to hit this audience, and that's about to hit myself as well. Um, so I appreciate you mentioning the stage presence, because in that video specifically, man, I was in front of Mello Jones, I was in front of all these great poets. I was like, man, like I'm shaking on the inside, but it's the job of a poet and the job of a performer to be able to stay composed with all that and to be able to communicate that in a way that impacts other people without uh, doing it to the point where it just breaks you down on stage. Like, you still got to be strong enough to deliver the piece. And it's a balance that a lot of people struggle with being on stage. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
No problem, man. Because it's the truth and it's the reality. Man, this has been a dope conversation. Before we end this conversation, I'm not gonna put any pressure on you. If you want to recite something, the floor is yours. It's up to you.
Oh, let's see. Let's see. All right. Ooh, I'll do a fun one. I'll do a fun one.
Okay.
I write a lot of sad stuff.
All right.
All right. Yeah, this poem is about a friend I used to have. His name was Jack.
Okay.
Jack was friends with everybody, real player like too. He had a dope style, real smooth, old fashioned type of dude. All the guys and girls wanted a shot with Jack. They used to chase him around with smiles, but you see, me and him, we were inseparable. He was bisexual, but in public, he acted neat and straight. But in private, the world was our country. I was the president. He was my vice, my sugar and spice, and everything right. He used to wear this cologne. Everyone knew him by his scent. We'd spend so much time together. It would eventually spill on to me, and people would start to say, "Ooh, you're starting to smell like Jack." Whenever I stayed the night at his crib, we used to sneak out. We tried to stay silent, but the door was old. Every time he went to lock it, he made the knob creak with his key. But once we were out, we sneak out to parties, and I always found myself pressing my lips to his neck until that special fluid came flowing up out of him. I don't know. I guess he just brought out the best in me. Made me more courageous, more spontaneous. He was my ecstasy, and I was addicted to his effect. You see the way he numbed my pain whenever I was tempted to turn myself into the next Kurt Cobain. Being with him was like working at Adidas. The way he made me feel, I just snorted 3 white lines of that pure cocaine. But one night, Jack's love became too much for me to handle. An overload of sensation, face glued to the toilet. Remember going out like a candle. If you haven't caught on by now, this poem ain't about a guy. It's about Jack Daniels. Let me run it back. Listen careful and try to dismantle. I said, I used to have this friend. His name was Jack. Jack was friends with everybody. Real player like too. He had a dope style, real smooth, old-fashioned type of dude. All the guys and girls wanted a shot with Jack. They used to chase him with smiles, but you see, me and him, we were inseparable. He was bisexual, but in public, he acted neat and straight. But in private, the world was our country. I was the president. He was my vice, my sugar and spice and everything, right? A tall, dark, and a handsome man. On some nights, I needed both hands to handle all that, man. He used to wear this cologne. Everyone knew him by his scent. We'd spend so much time together, it would eventually spill on to me. And people would start to say, "Oh, you're starting to smell like Jack." Whenever I stayed the night at his crib, we used to sneak out. We tried to stay silent, but the door was old. Every time we went to lock it, he made the knob creak with his key. I said he made the knob creak whiskey, but once we were out, we sneak out to parties, and I always found myself pressing my lips to his neck until that special fluid came flowing up out of him. I don't know. I guess he just brought out the best in me. Made me more courageous, more spontaneous. He was my ecstasy, and I was addicted to his effect. You see the way he numbed my pain whenever I was tempted to turn myself into the next Kurt Cobain. Being with him was like working at Adidas. The way he made me feel, I just snorted 3 white lines of that pure cocaine. But one night, Jack's love became too much for me to handle. An overload of sensation, face glued to the toilet. Remember going out like a candle, but I could still feel that shit. Blacked out, hand falling in the toilet. I could literally feel that shit. It has officially been 1 year since I last spoke to Jack, but I think about him every single day. I got this new girl in my life, though, that keeps me on the straight and narrow. Her name's Dasani. The first day I met her, I said, "Golly, girl, you looking like a tall glass of water. I'm trying to get me a little sip." I extended my hand and said, "Girl, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Thirsty." Poem. Thank you so much. Thank you, man. Thank you.
And that's how we're gonna end it, man. That was fire. That was fire. That was fire. That's how you end an amazing conversation with an amazing poet.
Appreciate that, man. Greatly.
How can people find you?
Currently on all social media platforms, just my first and last name, Demetri Manabat, DemetriManabat. I'm still working out the details, but hopefully next month I'll be headlining a show on the Strip, so that'll be nice. Over in Las Vegas. Currently working on my first chat book, and currently working on getting specifically Barbie available to the public to be able to have access to. So the transcript actually, but yeah, currently just social media right now. But yeah,
Definitely. And from that one piece, man, you growing a huge fan club. It's growing on TikTok, it's growing on Instagram, and let's get that up on YouTube, man. And
yes,
I'm looking forward to more content, man, because
thank you, man.
you have a gift, especially being Filipino.
Hmm.
You know, you have a lot of kids that's gonna look up to you, and you
Yeah,
can be that next um, person that can inspire those kids that wants to do poetry in the future.
that's the hope, man. That's the hope.
And it's not the hope; it will happen, man.
Thank you. I
You're on the
appreciate
right
that.
path, man. Right
Thank
path.
you, man.
This has been another great episode on Dad is Not a Now. Follow me on YouTube. You can hear this on Spotify, iTunes. Google me. You'll find me, and you'll find this amazing interview that I had with this amazing brother. And we're out. Peace.
Peace.